Hello again, my name is Zero Ash and this is Zero Ash Podcast. Today we're gonna talk about the release of one of the titans in electronic music. It's the IDM heavyweight Aphex Twin. Recently I was claiming that the latest releases in electronic music demonstrate its decay over its development, especially due to the fact that the genre hasn't been represented by something interesting and significant during the last couple of years. However, in reality we've already seen an array of really great electronic releases, including the albums of Dance with the Dead, Eve Tumor, and now Aphex Twin. So, long story short, it's one of the most important electronic albums of nowadays, and if you have never heard about it, or even worse, never heard it, you'll definitely want to check it out, and here's why. Let's start with a brief background as usual. If you have never heard of Aphex Twin for some reason, I'd like to tell you that you need to listen to a couple of his first albums in order to figure out who he is and what is his music about. Especially you need to pick something between his first three albums or all three of them, because I really consider them the best in his music career. As for his name, which is a nickname of course, his real name is Richard D. James, and you should know about him the following. He became one of the most influential avant-gardist, like for real, avant-gardist electronic musicians of the 1990s. That's because of his three first albums mentioned previously. In the contrary, I cannot say that I really enjoyed his latest releases, because I found them rather dull and somewhat boring to my taste. That's why prior to listening to this album I was not expecting much from the current release as well. It's necessary to know that it's really hard to see something solid about the album's conceptual framework and or its message or meaning, because Aphex Twin mostly releases fully instrumental music with some minor inclusion of vocal samples. Nonetheless, it's also worth mentioning that every one of his tracks contains too many details, sounds, structures and samples, so that any inclusion of vocals will be really redundant and not needed. There are 5 music tracks lasting for almost half an hour. All of them create an atmosphere of an adventure or a journey that feels like something close to a bad narco trip while flying up in a huge tunnel, or a ride in super futuristic train running with a lightning speed. Something like that. It's that surreal. Basically, this spirit and feeling of futurism in music is extremely abundant. What is more important in this regard, while listening to this album, it's necessary to use imagination and create certain associations and feelings that will somehow fit into the sounds of these tracks. So, let me share my thoughts, experiences and impressions gathered during the listening experience. It's because otherwise we'll have nothing to really talk about in regards to this album. So, the opening track, T69 Collapse, sounds like the aforementioned futuristic tunnel, which flies you through the different buildings, objects and structures which you've never seen before. I felt the overall atmosphere of cybernetics and increased speed, which was represented by the fast and syncopated beat and multi-layered instrumentals. I cannot say that this track can be defined as highly melodic. Instead, this track highly emphasizes on the use of different rhythmic patterns and inclusion of various occasional samples. Then, the second track, First 44, we hear the vocal samples highly infused with different phasers and reverberators, the randomized pattern of their occurrence in the track, and the overall timbre of the samples create the impression of Death Grips music, just because of their chaotic nature and because they sound like MC Riot's vocals. The same transitions from one melody to another are also present, but they are more properly structured and less chaotic than in previous track and in the rest of the album, to be honest. As for my own associations during the listening of the track, I felt like taking a high-speed elevator somewhere above the aforementioned cybernetic and futuristic world. Next, with the track MT1 T29 R2, we can finally hear something close to a leading melodic part, which is represented by an arpeggiated mass which I can define as a mess on a synthesizer. In the beginning of the track, it sounds like a complete chaotic mess, I'm sorry, because it is. However, with the track's development and inclusion of different rhythmic and melodic layers, it still sounds like a mess, but in a more controlled, in a more clearly structured and refined manner, which gives it like more sound and more value to it, I think. Plus, this is one of the tracks where the melodic content is put on a pedestal, instead of focusing strictly on rhythmic patterns like in previous tracks. This melodic content is basically represented by the flowing synthesizer pads, sounding close to piano, I guess. In total, the tracks create an impression of chasing an unknown object that you want to catch but cannot get to it because it runs too fast. Something like that, if you can imagine. Abundance 10 added, and like a long name and combination of symbols, which I don't want to read. It sounds like an old school techno beat because of its inclusion of 88s combined with dark and groovy retrowave style sounds and structures. In short, it sounds somewhat close to Lawrence music, but much faster in tempo and with a syncopated rhythm. This atmosphere is also complemented by the voice sample telling, "Give me your hand and I will lead you to the land of abundance." Final track, Aphex, P-T-H-E-X, I don't know how to read it, but here it is. Features highly detuned synthesizer parts with the inclusion of really similar syncopated rhythmic in the first two tracks, which amounts for almost 90% of the track's sounds. As for the melodic parts here, they are included rarely, like really carefully and on really rare occasions. However, with the track's development, the final transition sounds really really great, to be honest and to be short, because of its mood and change of atmospheres and moods, which I've said before, whatever. All in all, after listening to this album, I've created the following plot or scenario, if you will. With the first track, it felt like appearing in the new futuristic world, unknown before, which instantly dragged me into his cybernetic nature. With the next tracks, it felt like I was offered some salvation from this futuristic mess and offered to get to the land of abundance, which made me feel finally collapsing and vanishing inside it with the last notes of the album and really agonizing and collapsing rhythm of the closing track. Therefore, I really like this album in total because of its strange, surreal, its bizarre experience it gave to me. On the contrary, it should be understood that you need to use your imagination and creativity to draw some associations inside your mind in order to enjoy the album on a proper level. Otherwise, it will sound like a complete mess with clashing synths, samples and drums. Just because of that, I cannot even listen to this album on a regular basis and for long, despite the fact that my first listening experience was more than pleasant. That's why I'd rate it 4 out of 5. So, that's it for today. Thanks for listening. If you like this podcast, please give it a like. If you're here for the first time, please consider subscribing. Also, check the links in the description. You can follow my social media links if you want to and say hi. So, that's it for now. Thanks for listening once again, and you'll hear me next time. Goodbye.